Katherine Knight would work at the butcher every day, and she'd come home and sharpen up her butcher's knives and she'd hang them right above her bed every single night, and apparently this was pretty normal for her. I don't know about you, but this sounds like the biggest red flag I've ever heard of. I just want to jump in and say that the story is a little bit gory, so I'm just warning you from the get-go. Hi, my name's Yasmin and I make videos about things that are either scary or disturbing in some way. They're always true stories and I post once a week. Please subscribe and give the video a thumbs up and we'll get on with the rest of it. Katherine Knight was in her 40s living in a small town in New South Wales in Australia. She worked as a butcher and she really loved her job, which is so special, but also it's kind of weird because she really enjoyed carving up animals. She loved dealing with offal and just all that sort of bloody and gory stuff. She just loved it. It was like a dream job for her. Katherine's personal life was super turbulent. She'd been married twice before and she had a total of 4 kids between the 2 marriages. She always had some sort of beef going on with the guys that she was with, or her ex-husbands, I guess. Most of the problems did stem from her though, and for example, one of the crazy things she did was with her last husband. He threatened to leave her, so she bashed him on the head with an iron and then she tried to stab him in the stomach with some scissors, which obviously led to the relationship really breaking down. It was never going to work really after that. She was super feisty and she never actually stayed with one partner for too long. So apart from trying to stab her ex-husband in the stomach, one of the reasons why her last marriage ended was because she was actually having an affair with a man named John Charles Thomas Price. John was actually known to be a pretty nice guy. He worked in the mines and he had heaps of friends and co-workers that he was familiar with. Like, he was just in a really good place in his life. He had 3 kids of his own and Katherine had 4 from her previous marriages. Their relationship started off quite well actually, and they got along perfectly, to the point where John would actually invite Katherine to move in with him, and of course Katherine said yes. Everything was just smooth sailing. One day, Katherine out of nowhere just brought up the idea of marriage because naturally she was expecting some sort of proposal. But when John said he just didn't want to ever get married to her, this is when things started to get a little bit heated. And how dare he not want to get married to her? She came up with a plan to get him fired from his workplace that he'd been at for 17 years. The way she did that is that she recorded basically the fact that he'd stolen a whole bunch of really cheap medical equipment that was already thrown into the trash by his workplace, and she basically took this video and sent it to his boss. Obviously, the boss thought that he'd actually stolen the new stock, not the stuff that was sent into the trash, and they fired him. This really pissed John off, to say the least, and he kicked Katherine out of his house, like naturally. I feel like that's pretty justified. Under no circumstances was John going to let Katherine move back in with him. After she did something like this, she really displayed the fact that there was a little bit of a screw loose in her head. So he did continue to, have a relationship with her, but she just lived in a different apartment. And I don't think anyone would have known how much this was going to affect John's life in the future. Katherine was super tenacious and she restarted their relationship, although this time John kept a really safe distance. There was no way he was letting Katherine move back into his house under any circumstances. Katherine was always to stay in her own apartment every single night. One night they had a little bit of an altercation and over time it turned into this really big deal, and Katherine just tried to stab John in the chest, but luckily he deflected it and came out completely unscathed. But this really scared John, and completely understandably, he went over and got a restraining order the very next day. And he was basically scared that she was going to come and kill him or his kids. In fact, he even told his co-workers that if anything happened to him or if he went missing, then they should really look into Katherine because she's got the ability to kill somebody. So it's really hard to know, but I think after this whole stabbing incident, or like attempted stab incident, they sort of broke up for good, but Katherine really couldn't let him go. She was still living this dream of still being with John. So on the 28th of February in the year 2000, Katherine arranged for John's children to go over for a sleepover one night. It was really weird because she didn't actually tell John about this, so she didn't get his approval. He didn't even have any knowledge that his kids were going to go to a sleepover that night until it was already happening. During the day though, Katherine would go out shopping and she bought some really special lacy black lingerie for the occasion. By the time night rolled around, John came home and he was absolutely knackered. He had a quick dinner after hanging out with the neighbours for a bit and just went straight to bed. Katherine, after he was in bed, snuck into the house, again without John actually knowing. She took a shower, she watched some TV, she had some food, but then she went into the bed with him. And after their intimate encounter, John went to sleep. The next morning is when people started to pick up that something really weird had actually gone on. John's car was still parked outside on the driveway, and it was a work day. It really wasn't like John to skip work for no reason. I mean, his neighbours had seen him the night before, and he seemed completely fine. At work, his colleagues were starting to get super sus because John only just told them or pre-warned them about Katherine and that if he was missing, that they should suspect something happened to him because of that recent incident that went down. When the neighbours and the colleagues couldn't really get a hold of John and they couldn't really get any answers as to where he may have gone, they went over to John's house and just knocked on the door. But there was no answer. They tried to sort of peer in through the windows, but it was really dark and you couldn't actually see anything into the house. It was clear that, John must be at home, but it didn't seem like anyone was at home. But their suspicions were completely warranted because when they sort of examined the door handle area a little bit better, they could actually see that there was little smudges of blood on it. This was the sign they needed to call the police, and the police promptly arrived to the property. So the police knocked on the front door. Again, same thing, no answer. So they went round the back of the house where they peered into the windows and they still couldn't see anything because it was so dark inside the house. One thing that seemed really strange though was the fact that there was a plate of cooked meat and veggies sort of thrown out into the garden haphazardly. It really didn't mean much to them at this point, but it was still a strange finding. They knocked on the back door, still no answer, so they had no choice but to knock it down. Upon entering the property, the police officers stepped into a pool of blood. They also looked around them and saw all this blood just smeared across the walls and all over the floors. Something had definitely happened here and they had to walk into it. They couldn't really walk away at this point. The police officer pulled out his gun, ready to go in his right hand, and he slowly made his way around the house. First he went into the living room, and before he could get into the living room, there was sort of like a big curtain hanging from the door frame. And he got his hand that he wasn't holding the gun with and he slowly opened up the curtain. But this curtain felt really weird. It was like wet and cold, and he pulled his hand out from under it and his hand was just covered in blood. What on earth was this curtain made of? Well, he examined it a little bit closer and realized that this was a whole piece of somebody's skin hanging down like a drape. He had to sort of ignore this and push the skin out of the way as he was confronted with the headless body of John lying on the floor of the living room. There was blood everywhere. Not only did they have to find where the head was, but I don't think they had any idea what horrors were waiting to be discovered. They slowly walked through the living room, gun in hand still, and they made their way over to the kitchen. Next to the kitchen in the dining area, there was a dining table perfectly set as if there was going to be a dinner party, but it was like 8 in the morning. The food was already on the plates. There was some meat, sort of like a steak, and some veg on the plates. There was knives and forks on there. There was even little name placards on the table to say who was sitting where just for seat allocation. This didn't make any sense with the surrounding situation at all. So police walked into the kitchen, and in the kitchen they could see that somebody had recently been cooking something. There is where they found a massive pot in the kitchen, and it was just on the stove top. They felt the pot and it actually felt kind of warm, so someone had recently been cooking here. They opened up the lid of that pot, and I don't know if you can guess what's in there, but it was John's head. His head had previously been boiled with a whole bunch of vegetables and it was still sitting in the pot. The police officers had to keep going though. They proceeded upstairs and they could hear that someone was sleeping there. When they went into the bedroom, they found that Katherine was actually asleep on the bed. When they tried to sort of rouse her, she wouldn't actually wake up or open her eyes at all. And so they actually carried her down the stairs and took her to hospital. This is what happened after John went to sleep that night, that Katherine visited him unannounced. Once Katherine made sure he was fast asleep, she reached over into her night bag on the side of the bed and pulled out a sharp butcher's knife, one that she would use at work. She proceeded to violently stab John while he slept. John was bleeding profusely, but he actually woke up and he scrambled out of bed and tried to turn the light on in the room. Katherine quickly followed him. With each moment she could get, she just stabbed him more and more. He dragged himself out of the room and sort of stood up a little bit, stumbling along the stairs, coming right down, and eventually he couldn't really stand anymore because he was losing so much blood. He went down into a crawl and he got to the front door. He was almost able to open the front door, but Katherine was right behind him. In that last moment, she grabbed onto his legs and she dragged him away from his only hope of escape. John died soon after this from blood loss from all the wounds that Katherine had inflicted. In fact, she stabbed him 37 times. Next, Katherine heaved his body into the living room, and what she did next is so nasty. She skinned him in one clean-cut piece, just like she would skin an animal at work. She then hung him on some meat hooks that she had hanging off the ceilings, and she proceeded to cut out various parts of muscles in his body, particularly on his back. She made steaks out of the muscle from his back, and she cooked them with some vegetables on the side. She actually plated them and she made little name placards that had his children's names on it because she was planning on feeding these steaks to his children. It looks like she tried a little bit of the steak herself, but she felt so nauseous that she just chucked it out the window, which is what that upside down plate was that the police would later find in the backyard. She then went back and decapitated him. She filled up a large pot of water and got it boiling, and she put that head in the boiling water with some vegetables to create, I don't know, some sort of stock. In the early hours of the morning, she actually turned it off so it would cool down. Then she left the house to get out about $1,000 in cash using John's account. No one actually knows what happened to this $1,000 and where she put it. People think she may have actually buried it in the garden or buried it somewhere so that if she did escape, she still had some money with her. No one really knows for sure though. I think this is when she realized she was actually never going to get away with this. So she took a whole bunch of sleeping pills and laid in bed waiting for her death. But to her horror, she actually ended up waking up a few days later in hospital after a coma. She was immediately questioned by police, but she was super disorientated, or at least that's what she said. She also said she couldn't remember a thing about murdering anybody. Katherine was arrested, and during her trial, she showed no signs of remorse. In fact, she even claimed she couldn't remember anything because of the medication she'd taken. This was no excuse for what she'd done though. This is kind of weird. During her trial, she initially pleaded not guilty, but then for some reason halfway through, she changed her plea to guilty, and no one knows why she did this. It's such a crazy thing to do this that the judge actually asked for her to have a psychiatric exam in which she was deemed fit to stand trial, surprisingly. The judge deemed her crime was so severe that they sentenced her to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, and this was the first time ever in Australian history for this to happen to a woman. They even stamped her file with big bold writing saying, "Definitely never to be released." That was the story of Katherine Knight. If you found that interesting, then please subscribe, give the video a thumbs up. I post once a week, so I'll see you in my next video. Bye.